What's good, YouTube? It's your boy Wales, New Jersey, back again for another UFC preview. UFC 310, Pantoja versus Asakura, live from the T-Mobile Arena this Saturday night. Let's take a look at some of the fights on this card. Alright, UFC 310, Pantoja versus Asakura from the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. First fight of the night will be Kennedy Nzechukwu versus Lucas Brzezinski. Then we got Clay Guida versus Chase Hooper. And Clay Guida still going strong at 42 years of age. Good for him, man. He is 18-18 in the UFC, so he's a perfect 500. He's had a couple of losses though in his past couple of fights against Rafa Garcia and Joaquin Silva, and he's been fighting for a long time. Made his debut back in 2006. Will this be his last fight? We shall see. He is fighting Chase Hooper, the 25-year-old, who is 6-3 in the UFC, with his last win in the octagon. Looked quite good actually against Vyacheslav Borashchev with a DOS choke in round 2. Pretty good win there for Chase Hooper in his last fight. Interesting fight there, new school versus old school. Then after that, we got Michael Chiesa versus Max Griffin. And after that, Cody Durden versus Joshua Van. Now this should be a banger here, lads. Cody Durden, in his last fight, beat Matt Schnell by ninja choke. And he got a performance of the night for it in round 2. He is 6-4 in the UFC, made his debut in 2020. He had a couple of losses before that though, but he's looked pretty good in his a couple of fights in there, so we'll see. But he's fighting Joshua Van, who is 4-1 in the UFC. With his last outing against Edgar Chairez came by unanimous decision. His only loss was to Charles Johnson in the 3rd round. But this guy can fight, man. This Joshua Van likes to stand and bang and throw big heavy hits, so it should be a scrap. It should be a good scrap. And then after that, we end the early prelims with Chris Weidman versus Eric Anders. This match was rescheduled from a couple of weeks ago. Chris Weidman fell ill the night of the fight, so they just pushed it back a couple of events. Then we kick off the prelims. A banger to kick it off. Randy Brown versus Brian Bowell. Randy Brown is 13-5 in the UFC, with his last win against Elizeu Zaleski coming by decision. Before that, he beat Muslim Sakharov. Straight rights matter. Shout out to my boy Lou in the 1st round. Beat Wellington Thurman. Lost to Jack Della Maddalena, but who hasn't? And as you can see here, Francisco Trinaldo, Chaos Williams, Jared Gooden, Alex Oliveira did lose to Vicente Luque. He's got a good record in the UFC's Randy Brown. He's a good fighter, but he is facing Brian Bowell, who is on a tear. Brian is 6-1 in the UFC with his last win coming out there in Paris, France, when he beat Kevin Jousset, beat him by punches in round 2. And before that, it was a no contest, so it was a no contest in round number 2. So a little bit after that, talking a little bit of smack to each other. I should have beat you. Yeah, you were losing the fight. Battle's been bringing it recently, lads. You know, developed into a good character and a very good fighter. Before that, you can see beat AJ Fletcher by a rear naked choke. Beat Gabe Green by a counter right hook. Lost to Rinat Fakhretdinov by decision. And before that, Sato by head kick. Beat Tresean Gore and Gilbert Urbina. So this is a fight to watch, lads. Randy Brown versus Brian Bowell. After that, another banger. Movsar Evloev versus Aljamain Sterling. Movsar Evloev is undefeated in the UFC. He is 8-0, and his last fight was against Arnold Allen at the beginning of the year in January, where it went to unanimous decision. He also has a win over Diego Lopez, who is on an absolute streak. Could be fighting for a title soon. Also beat Dan Ige, Hakeem Dawodu, Nick Lentz, Mike Grundy, the list goes on. He is facing a veteran, a former champion in Aljamain Sterling. Aljamain's last fight, he is 16-4 in the UFC, made his debut in 2014. His last fight in the UFC was against Calvin Kattar. He beat him by decision. And he's been taking a few grappling matches too, you can see here. Lost one of them, he's won 3 of them. But before his last win in the octagon, he did lose to Sean O'Malley for the belt. That was back in August of 2023. But before that, look who he's beat, man. Henry Cejudo, TJ Dillashaw, Peter Yan twice, Corey Sandhagen, Pedro Munoz, Jimmy Rivera, Cody Statement, Brett Johns. Lost to Marlon Moraes back in 2017. But Aljo is a major step up here for Ilavov. So this could potentially be on the main card. I believe it should be on the main card. So this is going to be a banger here. Then after that, we got Vicente Luque versus Themba Gorbino, and then Anthony Smith versus Dominic Reyes, and that will do it for the preview for the prelims. All right, and we kick off the main card with Nate Landwehr versus Do Ho Choi. Nate Landwehr, he is 5-3 in the UFC, and his last performance against Jamal Emmers was a great fight. Ended up finishing it in round 1 with uppercut, right hook, and hammer fists, earned a performance of the night bonus. Lost before that was against Dan Ige, then he also beat Austin Lingo, David Onama, Ludovic Klein, lost to Julian Erosa. Nice performance bonuses that he's got here. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4 in his last 5 or 6 fights, man. This guy puts on a show. And he's a fun character to watch too. But he's facing Do Ho Choi, the Korean Superboy, who is 4-3 in the UFC. Came into the UFC and took it by storm, man. He came in there, when was it? Back in 2014 against Juan Manuel. Beat him, then he beat Sam Sicilia, round 1 punches, performance of the night bonus. Thiago Tavares, round 1. And then he had that fight against Cub Swanson. That was one hell of a fight. That's already in the UFC Hall of Fame fights, the fight win. And then after that, I think he took a lot of damage in that fight and didn't really seem the same. It looked like his chin took a bit of a beating and wasn't really the same. After that, he fought Jeremy Stevens and lost in round 2. And then Charles Jourdain, he lost in round 2 as well, but still earned performance of the night and fight of the night. And then he had to go back to Korea and do his mandatory 2 years military service, which could have benefited him to take a couple of years off. Let his chin calm down, hang out for a little bit, like goodness me. But then his last outing, he beat Bill Algero by left hook in round number 2. And now he's back again on the last pay-per-view of the year. So it's a good fight. This is a very good fight to kick off the main card. Nate Landwehr versus Do Ho Choi. And then after that, we got Bryce Mitchell versus Kron Gracie. Bryce Mitchell is 7-2 in the UFC, made his debut in 2018. His last outing was against Josh Emmett. It was one of the most nastiest knockouts I think I've ever seen, man. He was twitching on the ground. That was bad. That was a bad fucking knockout. But he's taken a year off, got his head right. He said he wasn't right going into that fight. Everything wasn't lined up the way he wanted it to. But he's back. He says everything's good now, and he's ready to go. And he is facing Kron Gracie, one of the Gracies. Kron is 1-2 in the UFC. Lost his last 2 fights against Charles Jourdain and Cub Swanson. Before that, though, he did beat Alex Bruce Leroy Caceres by rear naked choke in round 1. I got a feeling this is going to be a battle of jiu-jitsu. American jiu-jitsu versus Brazilian jiu-jitsu. One of the founders of jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and the Gracie family fighting one of their own. So this should be an interesting fight, man. Interesting. Looking forward to that one. And then after that, we got Cyril Gane versus Alexander Volkov. Cyril Gane is 9-2 in the UFC. His last outing was against Sergey Spivak, which he won in round 2 by punches. He lost to John Jones, beat Tai Tuivasa Lost his interim belt against Francis Ngannou by decision. And to note too, these guys have fought before, where Ngannou beat him by unanimous decision, but that was in 2021. So 3 years later, they're gonna do it again. Alexander Volkov, big Russian man, 6'7" Russian heavyweight, is 12-4 in the UFC. His last outing was against Sergey Pavlovich, which he won by decision. Before that, he beat Tai Tuivasa, Alexander Romanov, Jairzinho Rozenstruik, lost to Tom Aspinall, beat Marcin Tybura, lost to Cyril Gane, beat Overeem Walt Harris, and lost to Curtis Blades. So this is a rematch. A rematch in the making there. Gane obviously granted that fight, and we'll see how it goes. Volkov has definitely improved since that last fight, so it should be an interesting match. And that brings us to the co-main event of the evening. Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Ian Garry. Shavkat Rakhmonov is on a tear, lads. He is 6-0 in the UFC. He is 18-0 professionally. This man has finished every single one of his fights. Every single one. Look at this. Round 1, round 2, round 1, round 1, round 2, round 2, round 3, round 2, round 2, round 1. Like a damn song. Look at this though. This guy is for real. And he was supposed to fight Bilal Muhammad for the belt on this, but Bilal pulled out because he had an injury. But his last outing was against Stephen Thompson, where he choked him out in the second round. Before that, he choked out Jeff Neal in the third round. Before that, he choked out Neil Magny in the second. Then Carlston Harris, a spinning hook kick to ground strikes. This guy is for real, lads. He is for real. This should be a title fight, but Bilal pulled out. And he's fighting Ian Garry, who is also undefeated in the UFC and professionally. He is 15-0 professionally, and he is 8-0 in the UFC. His last outing was against Michael Venom Page, which he won by unanimous decision. Got real close there against Jeff Neal by a split decision. And then before that, Neil Magny, Daniel Rodriguez, Kanam Song, Gabe Green, Darian Weeks, Jordan Williams. So this is a battle of undefeated fighters. As Michael Buffer used to say back in the day, somebody's O was got to go. So this is going to be a brilliant match here. It came out this week that, because these guys used to be training partners, they used to be on the same team. Came out this week that Shavkat actually submitted Ian Garry in training. So Ian said, if he wants to hang on to that, then you do it. I've changed as a fighter since then. But you want to hang on to that, you keep doing that. I'll punch a hole in your face. So, interesting fight, man. Interesting fight. Looking forward to that one. Then that brings us to the main event of the evening. Alejandro Pantoja versus Kai Asakura. Kai Asakura is making his UFC debut in a title fight. Really hear that much these days. He was a champion over there in the Japanese promotion Risen. He was 13-3 in that promotion, and his last fight was against Juan Archuleta. Knee to the body in round 2, finished him, and he won his belt. And before that, he's been fighting a bunch of Japanese guys. He did fight Manel Kape, and he lost to him back in 2019. But that was the second time that they fought. In 2018, he fought Kape and beat him by split decision. So this is a big jump up for Kai Asakura. I believe this is very smart marketing by the UFC, because Kai Asakura is a superstar in Japan. He will definitely bring fans and eyes to this event. He said there's a lot of Japanese fans traveling to Vegas to watch this fight. He's got a huge social media following over in Japan. I think he's got 500,000 followers on Instagram. He's got over 1 million on YouTube. So this guy brings a lot of eyes to his fights. But he's fighting Alejandro Pantoja, the champion, who is 12-3 in the UFC, made his debut in 2017. His last outing was against Steve Erceg. He also beat Brandon Royval, Brandon Moreno, Alex Perez, Manel Kape, lost to Askarov and Davison Figueiredo, and then Dustin Ortiz back in 2018. But man, this guy has improved on every single fight that he has. He trains down at American Top Team down there in Florida, one of the best teams in the game. I think this is a very tall order for Kai Asakura. Pantoja is no joke, and it's going to take a tall order to beat this guy, especially in your UFC debut. So one thing you got to remember, over in Rizin, they fight in a ring. This is going to be Kai's first fight in an actual cage. So that is a big factor that does play into it. You know, the big lights and everything and all that. Like, it's going to be difficult for Kai Asakura, but it's an interesting fight. He does have the tools to win, but can he? We shall see. And that will be it for the preview, lads. We will be calling this on Saturday night on Leather to the Face. Tune in, watch the fights with us. And as always, don't drink or drive.